Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about some of the best races of Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, at least before Tides of Torment comes out, and hopefully changes the balance around in the game. Actually, I hope that Tides of Torment changes more things around, but we will find out in December. Regardless, at the moment, at number 5, it is Kislev. Now, there are some issues with Kislev, but those issues are rather from the legendary lords of Kislev, the design of Kislev as a campaign area rather than Kislev the race. Because yes, the campaign area is not great, the legendary lords Castalton, Catherine, and Stanki are not great, that just leaves you with poor Cersus, and even he has his own problems. You might think that this campaign is awesome, sure. I mean, there's a reason Malachi's campaign is good, but the thing is, Malachi is just better at dealing with this because you can use the Underway. You can't use the Underway, unfortunately, so you have certain limitations he doesn't. That's one of the things about the Dwarves. They are really well suited for bad areas of the campaign map, but we'll get to them in just a bit. Suffice to say though, Kislev as a race, the new supporter system is awesome, giving you all kinds of different benefits, especially with regards to the orthodoxy. So you end up in a kind of situation where you have genuine scalability of your economy, genuine scalability on the campaign map, movement range, all kinds of different benefits. And think of something like spiritual conquest. You end up having population surplus and a lot of devotion in territory in the chaotic wasteland and capture for all the issues they cause you. And then, when you have a high level of devotion in a particular province, you also nullify climate penalties. That is an amazing system that really incentivizes Kislev to do what Kislev should be doing, which is fight chaos. Because having that high level of devotion in a province and population surplus does push that incentive structure towards dealing with the chaotic wasteland. Boris Ursus is here much better than others, but still, all others can benefit from it as well. And then you consider Atomans who can get Groundbreaker. I mean, this entire skill tree is a joke because, 100% tradable resources as opposed to nullifying entire climate penalty and reducing construction time by 1 turn. Yeah, CA, some things needed to be considered better. Like, no one's gonna pick anything else for their main Atomans. And you can move these guys from province to province. So when you take over a province, even if you don't have the orthodoxy benefit, but you have that skill for an Ataman, you dump them in, you start building control. Once you get to a high level of control, you nullify climate penalties. Or you can double dip and start using the invocation options. Different choices, variety. And the one thing I would also say about Kislev is that while they lack artillery, they got a lot of amazing things elsewhere. They have good infantry, they have good range, they have good magic, they have good cavalry. Things like Griffin Legion are freaking ridiculous with Glorious Charge. Or if you want heavier cavalry or monstrous units, you also have them. Sure, they could use a lower tier artillery option, because that's one of the things they do suffer from at the moment, and they could use a proper melee hero considering all they're dealing with, because the Patriarchs are ultimately just not going to be that. I will also say that what's kind of annoying by Patriarchs is you have to choose between the various songs over here, so you can't, get them all, really, and have those kind of power capabilities. So you end up with more limited abilities for Patriarchs than quite a few other heroes. Like, I would basically be fine if the choice of specific buffs that you could improve was exclusive, but that's not how it works. You just don't even get the ability in the first place. So, yeah, some issues, some things that need to be improved. The Ice Court, for instance, certain things in the research tree, but Kislev as a race does work. They have scalability, they have a fun army roster, they have potential. That is true. The things they suffer from the most is kind of like the one-dimensional aspect of their campaigns, but I would say that this year, the only good thing, genuinely good thing that CA did for all of 2025 was actually reworking Kislev. They went from one of the worst races to one of the best ones. Of course, in practical terms, the Legendary Lord and terrain situation does drag it down, but as a race in terms of its design, it is pretty good. At number 4, we have Khorne, and in fact, this race would be higher on this list if Creative Assembly had not made some questionable decisions, like Skulltaker's entire campaign, I would say. But you do have Arbol, who's an amazing Legendary Lord, Skarbrand, who's pretty good. Even though he doesn't have a unique mechanic, he's still pretty good out there. In fact, I would say Skarbrand is better to play than Skulltaker. What is really great about Khorne is you have a melee-focused race, but you have genuine variety in that single role. Which is, by the way, something that the people who worked on Troy and Varro wish they had managed to do with regards to Troy and Varro. Of course, there are some problems, but you do have things like Khorngors, you do have Cast Warriors, you do have Cast Warriors with Halberds, Chosen of Khorne, Skull Reapers, Wrathmongers. There is real variety of different infantry options here that do work, and same with cavalry, right? Because you consider Cast Knights, you consider Gorebeast Chariots, you consider Blood Shrines of Khorne. The one thing that doesn't work in terms of the unit roster is specifically melee or infantry demons or bloodletters, and exalted bloodletters don't work out because of the inherent issues of the auto resolve, but outside of that, a lot of things do work quite well. The reason that I'm not placing Khorne higher on this list, the playstyle works, the economy works, you do even have diplomacy that works, because yes, I know, it sounds like a joke, but you actually can be pretty good with diplomacy, and you have good campaign flexibility, because you get cultists, they set up cults, you can use those to teleport your faction leader. So that's great. What is the one issue? Well, this silly, ridiculous nonsense that, you need a demonics element for demonic units, you need a mortals element for mortal units. It's not really great, because mortal units are better, and also mortals elements give you 2 heroes as opposed to 1 with Blood Reapers. More importantly, the only things that are actually worth picking up from demonics elements are nothing in terms of blooders or early game units for them. You got beasts, by the way, that are available for both. But what you really want from demonic elements are skull cannons and maybe bloodthirsters. Maybe, but really skull cannons, because they're awesome. So that just means it's a whatever type affair with that entire system. Let's force the player to make a choice, but it's not really a choice. It's just a shitty system. And yes, that does drag down the race, but even so, that's just an annoyance you deal with early on in a campaign, and it's an annoyance for Khorne because of the fast-paced nature of Khorne campaigns. And it does drag them down, but it's not something enough to completely remove them from the list. There were a lot of good things about this rework. I just wish that they had also not implemented something as silly as that system. At number 3, there is the Skaven. The Skaven are a great race in many different ways. The kind of issues that they have are more specifically about the campaigns, the terrain, the Immortal Empires situation, but Skaven as a race are pretty damn fantastic. A lot of the unit roster works, so you have monsters, missile infantry, artillery, heroes, the sheer amount of heroes that you have, lord choices, legendary lord choices. There's a lot of things that do end up working out. Skaven have great climate options, they have great scalability, they do well with a lot of territory or not necessarily a lot of territory. They end up being hated by a lot of different factions. In fact, the one thing they struggle with is that a lot of people hate them. For good reason, I would add, but that is very appropriate. You shouldn't really engage in diplomacy with the Skaven, or if you do, it should be about backstabbing people. That's kind of one of the silly things about, Khorne. The idea of Khorne diplomacy is like a bit hilarious from my point of view. If there is any specific downsides for the Skaven, it comes from this. A lot of their melee infantry does not end up working out. They are missing the swarm aspect of the race. which they should have with Skaven slaves clan rats. I've talked about it before with like Was and such. And really, campaigns like Claw and Fraught end up suffering because of just the design of Immortal Empires, because you do have Estalia being a mess, you do have Kislev being a mess, and you have two of the best legendary lords or most unique lords in a campaign being ruined just because of that. But that just says something about the Skaven, because they're still a race that works very well in spite of many issues with the map design or starting position design that are present in Immortal Empires. And by the way, I'm just going to mention it. Claw's campaign always sucked, even Immortal Empires. I don't think his starting position ever worked out. It was an annoying starting position in Immortal Empires, and they carried it over instead of improving it. At number 2, we have the Dark Elves. Now, I'm sure many will be typing furious comments over this one. Why not the Empire? Why not the Ogres? Why not the Greenskins? Why not Warriors of Chaos? And look, boys and girls, you're not as clever as you think. I know how people react. But as I play the game more and more and more, as I spend thousands of hours in it, and something you only realize once you've played your 100th campaign and your 200th campaign, so on and so forth, is that the best campaigns and the best races to play in the campaign are not necessarily the ones that are the strongest. They're not even the ones like Ogres, who are both strong and have genuine variety and unique mechanics. But they're the ones where you're not wasting your time doing busy work. That is the thing that prevents the Ogres from being on this list, because the constant meat management in Ogre campaigns is just flat out frustrating to engage in. And also the management of camps and so on and so forth. And that is the problem that I have with Ogres. What about the Empire, you might ask? Well, the Empire is not an especially good race. It's just that Elspeth, Karl, and Gelt are good legendary lords. It's actually, I would say the Empire has 3 really good legendary lords that make a mediocre race and elevate it beyond what it is. Whereas Dark Elves are the opposite. They don't have the best legendary lords in the game. They don't have the most unique mechanics on those legendary lords, but what they do have is a very, very good core for themselves as a race that's also less annoying, fluffy management than you might have otherwise. Because the only management you do in a Dark Elf campaign is you build stuff, and you can instantly build it, and maybe you throw in a dictat here and there. Realistically, though, it's mostly just going to boil down to building up black arcs, using black arcs, and maybe trying to get some confederations along the way. They're not the most complex race in the game, but they do have a really good early game Unirostra between Dread Spears, Black Arcs, Reaper Bolt Throwers, Dark Shards. They have a good amount of heroes, and they have a hero of every type. They have a melee hero. They have a hybrid hero. They have a melee assassin that also gives you casualty replenishment and death hacks, or a damage dealer type hero. They have mages. They have an economy that scales about based on what you're going out there and doing, and it's fairly easy to maintain. Sure, for certain people who love the fluff and love playing the turn button simulator, I understand why those people would hate them. But if you're looking to play a race based on the actual pacing of the game right now, and the part where it's most interesting, which is the early game, anywhere up to turn 30 to 50, then Dark Elves do very well in that context. They might not have the individual replayability of legendary lords that some other races do, including ones lower on this list, but as a racial design, they are amazing. They could just really use those unique mechanics and a couple of balance updates and research. And one of the things I would also say is the Dark Elves reveal something. You can't be everything for everyone. There are people who want to play more slowly and just think that playing 300 turns campaigns is a great experience. Those people are a very, very small minority of the player base. And CA should stop considering how they make games for everything and actually make a good, solid playstyle of a campaign with good pacing instead of screwing all over the place. Finally, at number 1, we have the Dwarves. Now, it's always interesting to think about it. This video is not about the strongest races. I would have called it that if it was the case, and it would have included Wood Elves and Warriors of Chaos. Best means best races in terms of how they work with the flow of the game, not just someone who's dominating the entire campaign. But that's kind of the interesting part about Dwarves. There was a lot of love and care put into this race, and they work well on pretty much every level. They're strong, but they also have vulnerabilities, because, they're a bit slow. For units that are durable, the units that are faster are more vulnerable. You also lack anti-large with the exception of a couple of units. And for melee, that's just basically giant slayers, and there's various downsides to that. So dwarves are not just going to obliterate everything that stands in a path without a care in the world, unlike, say, Khorne. So they have those vulnerabilities, but they also have just such amazing design. Wish that CA had put a bit more love and care in the balancing of certain things like the deeps and how you access them, as well as, of course, Belagar and Forex campaign. But let me be clear, this is as close to the best racial design and balance of anything in this game, or maybe even in Total War history. The research tree is amazing, but also easily accessible. And yet it also gives you genuine improvements to how you play your campaign. Because if you look at things like Shield Wall, of course, interlocking shields, or you look at things as Grand Throne Chamber and Construction Guilds, it does vary up your campaign quite a bit. The confederations that you get access to through the Great Book of Grudges, as well as the Legendary Grudges, give you long-term objectives. Dwarves are great from the perspective that they work well in terms of short-term objectives with the Age of Reckoning. So they do very well in that long game, but they also have the longer game build-up with the Deeps, with Legendary Grudges, and if you're looking for a mid-game fun, you always have Malachi. So they end up being the single best race, having some of the best campaigns in Total War history. They can play very well if you play them slowly. They can play very well if you play them aggressively. There's always balancing aspects to manage it, but this is the model of what a race should be. Something that works well on every level of the game. They work well in battles, they work well in the campaign, they work well in the early game, mid game, and late game. They work well even when they don't have the best climate. They work well in terms of producing the variety, but also having a focused playstyle. I'm not exaggerating whatsoever on this. If you have never played the Dwarf campaign, understand the sheer depth and variety and choice consequences for them is unmatched by any other in the entire game. Sure, some races might be stronger in certain aspects or multiple aspects, but you also have to consider the management as well. So unlike, say, ogres, or unlike Skaven, or some other things, you don't have that constant annoying management with the dwarves. Except if you really just want to waste your time going through the forge, and that's something, you can waste a lot of time managing your fucking items if you want to. That's probably the one downside of the dwarves. The oath gold system really never worked that well, and still carries over. But with that exception, every single aspect is as close to perfect as you can imagine it in a whole Total War game. But it's not perfect, because you do have the time sink of the forge. Costin signing out.